Threshold 9 wasn't the kind of place anyone bragged about. Wedged in the overlap of 3 territorial claims, the mining planet belonged to everyone, and therefore no one, which meant disputes got settled with fists as often as arbitration boards. Rachel Torres had been welding junction seals on Excavator 7 for 3 hours when the shadow fell across her workspace. She didn't need to look up to know what cast it. The footfalls alone heavy, deliberate, carrying the weight of something that enjoyed being intimidating, told her everything. But she looked up anyway, lifting her welding mask to squint at the 9-foot wall of muscle and chitinous plating looming over her crew. Vex Ra, the Corinthian, had been making himself a problem for 2 weeks now, claimed jumping, intimidating surveyors, generally ensuring everyone knew he was the largest predator on a planet full of things that were emphatically not large. His species descended from ambush hunters, all forward momentum and natural armor that could shrug off small arms fire. "You are in Corinthian territory," Vexra announced, his voice like a rock slide with diction. Rachel set down her torch with careful precision. She'd been interrupted one too many times today. According to the filing with Threshold Authority, this seam is registered to Dyson Chen Industrial. That's us. If you've got a counterclaim, there's an office about 3 clicks west. They have forms. Around the dig site, workers stopped. A mix of Quellen, Witherin, and one very nervous Pithel, all of them freezing, not because they expected the human to win this argument, but because they wanted accurate descriptions when security arrived to scrape up what was left. "I do not need forms." Vexra stepped closer, each footfall a minor seismic event. "I need you gone." Rachel was maybe 5'7", compact, the kind of build that came from real work rather than augmentation. Her jumpsuit bore the logo of a consortium nobody had heard of. And her boots were expensive, the kind that said she'd been doing this long enough to know what mattered. "Then you're going to need those forms," she said evenly, "because I've got a schedule, and you're currently blocking Excavator 7's hydraulic access panel." What happened next occurred in about 4 seconds, though every witness would swear it felt simultaneously, faster and slower than that. Vex Ra charged. It wasn't a metaphorical charge, not an intimidation tactic. A full, committed, "this is going to end badly" charge that any reasonable species would respond to by running, surrendering, or making peace with whatever deities they favored. Rachel jumped, not backward, not to the side, but up and forward, meeting the charge like she'd been waiting for it. Her hands found purchase on Vexra's armor plating, grabbing ventilation ridges most species used for thermal regulation. She swung herself onto his back with the casual efficiency of someone mounting a particularly aggressive piece of industrial equipment. Later analysis would show her movement had been textbook perfect weight distribution, timing, grip placement, all executed in the span of a heartbeat. Vexra bellowed. He twisted violently, trying to shake her off, which would have worked on anything that wasn't human. Humans, apparently, had evolved on a planet where holding on to things that didn't want to be held was a survival trait. Her right arm snaked around his throat. Her left hand gripped her right wrist, forming a V-lock. She locked her legs around his midsection, difficult given the size differential, but she managed it with body mechanics that suggested extensive practice. Then she squeezed. Vex Ra clawed at her arm. His species had natural weapons that could punch through composite armor. His hands found nothing but her forearm, locked in place with pressure that shouldn't have been possible from something so small. He staggered. His roar became a wheeze. Rachel adjusted her grip, a minor correction that cut off whatever air Vexra had left and held on. 8 seconds after the charge began, Vexra collapsed face first into the dirt. Rachel rode him down, maintained the hold for another 2 seconds, then released and rolled clear. She stood, brushed dust off her jumpsuit, and looked at the assembled crowd like she'd just finished an unremarkable task. "Someone want to call medical?" she asked. I think he'll be fine, but choking out is choking out. Nobody moved. Threx, a Quellan trade representative visiting to negotiate transport contracts, had his recording device out. He'd captured everything. His mandibles clicked in the rhythm his species used to indicate profound confusion. You, Threx began, stopped, started again. He masses at least 3 times your weight. His bone density is how did you? Rachel walked over to her torch, checked that it hadn't been damaged, and picked up where she'd left off. Basic rear naked choke. He gave me his back when he charged. That's the problem with a lot of you guys. Too much forward momentum, not enough spatial awareness. This is... Threx's translator struggled. A combat technique? Sparring technique, actually. You know, for fun. The medical team arrived 6 minutes later. By then, Vexra had regained consciousness and was sitting up, looking at Rachel with an expression his species typically reserved for natural disasters. What? He managed, his voice raw. What are you? Rachel didn't look up from her welding. Contractor. Hydraulic specialist. Currently behind schedule. The footage transmitted to 17 networks within the hour. By evening, it had 400,000 views. By morning, 30 million and climbing. Rachel finished her shift, clocked out, and went to get dinner, completely unaware she'd just started something that would reshape how 36 species thought about close quarters combat. The establishment was called the Quantum Drift. Nobody could explain why, since it served alcohol, not physics lessons. 4 species clustered around a holo display, replaying the footage for the 16th time. Freeze it there, said Corin, a Witheran analyst whose crystalline structure refracted light in agitated patterns. Watch her weight distribution. She's calculating trajectory before he even commits. Pith, a Quellan xenobiologist, leaned closer. Her compound eyes tracked details invisible to most species. That's not calculation. That's pattern recognition. She's done this before many times. Look at the efficiency. 0 wasted motion. Impossible, grumbled Tane, a Corinthian merchant nursing the same drink for an hour. Vexra is trained. He survived combat in the outer reaches. You're telling me some excavator technician just guessed correctly? She didn't guess. Pith isolated the moment of contact. Our hands went exactly where they needed to go. Those ventilation ridges aren't obvious weak points. She knew his anatomy. Or she got lucky, Thane said, though he sounded less convinced than 5 replays ago. Corin made a sound like wind chimes in a storm, his species equivalent of derisive laughter. Lucky? Run the probability matrix. Factor in speed differential, mass ratio, reaction time required. The computational likelihood of success through random chance is 0.003%. Then she's military, Thane insisted. Special operations. Deep cover. A new voice joined the conversation. Syrinx, a pivotal information broker, slithered closer. Her sensory tendrils waved data into the shared display. 3 years with Dyson Chen Industrial. Before that, 2 years with Vermilion Mining. Before that, education credentials from something called Colorado School of Mines. Her background checks out. Civilian start to finish. Education in what exactly? Pith asked. Mechanical engineering with focus on high-pressure hydraulic systems. Syrinx pulled up documentation. Nothing about combat. Nothing about military service. There's a note in her recreational activities, though. Something called Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. The table went silent. Brazilian, Corin said slowly, refers to a geographic region on the human homeworld. Jiu-Jitsu appears to be combat techniques. Syrinx's tendrils curled. Not combat in a military sense. The translator keeps flagging it as sport, recreation, hobby, There are facilities across human-occupied worlds dedicated to teaching this. Civilians pay to attend, voluntarily. Pay to learn combat? Thane's crest flattened. As in, this isn't mandatory military training? Apparently not. Sarix expanded the data. Estimated 4 million active practitioners on Earth alone. Millions more across human colonies. They attend these facilities called gyms multiple times per week. They grapple. They choke each other until one loses consciousness or admits defeat. Then they help each other up and do it again. Pith's mandibles clicked rapidly. Mutual strangulation as social bonding? It gets stranger, Sarix continued. This particular discipline focuses on what they call submissions, forcing an opponent to acknowledge defeat through joint locks or choking. The stated goal is to allow a smaller, weaker individual to defeat a larger, stronger opponent through leverage and technique. Corn's structure flickered. So this contractor wasn't an anomaly. She was applying standard civilian training. Standard? Thane repeated the word like it tasted wrong. You're saying millions of humans can do what she did? To varying degrees of proficiency, apparently. She mentioned being a blue belt. That's a ranking system. Based on what I'm finding, it's the second or third tier in a hierarchy that extends several levels higher. The implications settled over the group like collapsing atmosphere. Pith broke the silence. Run that back. She's not even considered advanced by human standards? According to their ranking system? No, she's intermediate at best. Lieutenant Crest, a Witheran intelligence officer with 17 years of Border Patrol experience, sat across from Rachel Torres and tried to reconcile what his files told him with what his instincts screamed. The file said civilian contractor, no priors, exemplary work record. His instincts said potential crisis. I appreciate your cooperation, Crest began, his vocal modulator adding harmonics his species used for diplomatic encounters. This is purely procedural. Insurance purposes. Rachel nodded and sipped from a container that read, hydraulics don't fix themselves. Walk me through your thought process when Vexra initiated aggression. Rachel set down her drink. He charged. I had maybe 2 seconds to decide between getting trampled or doing something about it. I chose option 2. And option 2 was to mount a hostile 9-foot Corinthian and render him unconscious using a chokehold. Rear naked choke, Rachel corrected. There's a difference. RNC cuts blood flow to the brain, not airflow. Safer, actually. Less chance of tracheal damage. Crest made a note. The notation read, casual familiarity with rendering opponents unconscious. Expresses concern for their safety while doing so. How long have you been trained in combat? Rachel laughed. I'm not trained in combat. I know some grappling. Been doing jiu-jitsu for about 6 years on and off. Mostly off lately because work's been crazy. 6 years of weapons training. No weapons. Just grappling. It's all body mechanics and leverage. You learn how joints move, where the vulnerabilities are. It's basically applied physics with more bruises. Crest pulled up a file. I've been reviewing materials from Earth. These gyms you mention, can you explain their purpose? To train. Get better. Some people compete, but most just do it for fitness or because choking your friends is cheaper than therapy. She said this without irony. You choke your friends? They'd choke me too. It's mutual. You tap before anything tears or you pass out. Then you learn what you did wrong and try not to make the same mistake twice. Crest adjusted his crystalline composition, a stress response. And this is common among humans? Pretty common, yeah. Maybe not majority common, but there are gyms everywhere. Different disciplines too JIU-JITS, judo, wrestling. Some people cross-train in striking arts. But I mostly stick to grappling because I'm short and don't like getting punched in the face. Striking arts, Crest repeated. As in hitting each other? Boxing, Muay Thai, kickboxing. You wear protective gear. Mostly. Well, sometimes. Depends on the gym. Rachel picked up her drink again. Is this going somewhere? Because I've got a pressure calibration due by 1800. Crest changed tactics. Have you received military instruction of any kind? Nope. Closest I got was a self-defense seminar in college. But that was mostly yell loudly and run away. The jiu-jitsu came later. Why did you pursue this training? Rachel shrugged. Friend invited me to try a class. Figured it'd be good cardio. Turned out I liked the problem-solving aspect. Every role is like a puzzle. They're trying to strangle you. You're trying to escape or reverse position. It's engaging. They're trying to strangle you and you find this engaging? Well, yeah. I mean, they're not actually trying to kill me. It's cooperative resistance. We're both trying to improve. Crest felt what humans might call existential dread. Show me. Rachel blinked. Show you what? Demonstrate. I want to understand what you're describing. You want me to grapple with you? I want you to explain physically how a human your size defeats a Corinthian 3 times your mass. Rachel stood. Okay, but I'm not actually going to choke you out. That would be rude and possibly a diplomatic incident. Crest rose, activating his recording systems. Understood. Come at me like you're gonna grab me. Not fast, just show me the motion. Crest reached forward slowly. Rachel moved not away, but into the space beside his arm, her body angling. One hand controlled his wrist while the other pressed against his elbow. See, you're overextended now. Your base is compromised. If I step here, she demonstrated, and rotate my hips, your balance goes with me. Then it's just a matter of whether I want to take you down or control the limb. She released him. Crest checked his balance. The vulnerability had been obvious. She'd shown him the precipice without pushing him over. And this works regardless of size? Leverage doesn't care about size. Bigger opponents have advantages, strength, reach, mass, but they also have more weight to manage, more limbs to control. You learn to use that against them. What if they don't extend? What if they simply charge, like Vexra? Rachel grinned. That's actually easier. Forward momentum means they're committed. You just have to not be where they expect you to be, then use their motion to get where you need to go. Like riding a really angry bull, except the bull has a throat and bulls don't tap out. 3 months turned curiosity into crisis, though nobody could agree what kind of crisis it was. On Witherum Prime, the Security Consortium convened a closed session that immediately leaked. The summary: humans represented an asymmetric physiological advantage in confined engagements. The recommendation: designated buffer zones and mixed species stations, where human civilians would require escorts. The response from human territories: amusement, followed by polite but firm refusal. On the Corinthian homeworld, military academies began studying the footage as a case example in unexpected threat vectors. A dissertation titled "The Problem of Soft Body Advantage in Grappling Scenarios" became required reading for officer candidates. Recruitment propaganda started emphasizing agility training over raw strength for the first time in 6 generations. And on 17 different worlds. Self-defense instructors suddenly found themselves fielding requests from species who'd never considered that combat could happen within arm's reach. Rachel discovered her new employment status when a message arrived from a security consulting firm offering her a contract worth more than 3 years of hydraulics work. Job description: Interspecies Defensive Tactics Advisor. She declined. Then 3 more offers came. Then 12. She accepted the 5th one. mostly because they agreed to let her keep her mining gig part-time. Welding paid well, and she actually enjoyed the work, which was how she ended up in a converted warehouse on Threshold 9, teaching basic escapes to a class that looked like a xenobiologist's fever dream. 2 Quellans. 1 Pithel, a Witheran who kept apologizing for his crystalline structure. And most surprisingly, a Corinthian who'd introduced himself as Thorax and very pointedly didn't mention Vexra. "All right," Rachel said. Standing in the center of the mat she'd shipped at considerable expense. "First rule, tap early, tap often. Your ego isn't worth a torn ligament. Second rule, we're here to learn, not win. If you think you're winning, you're learning wrong." Thorax raised a massive hand. Question: why would I tap before injury occurs? Wouldn't that teach weakness? "It teaches survival," Rachel said. "You can't learn if you're in medical. And honestly, if you wait until something tears, you've already lost. The whole point is recognizing danger before it becomes damage." She demonstrated on the Witheran, who'd volunteered with the kind of nervous energy that suggested he'd lost a bet. She showed them basic wrist control, the angle required, the pressure points that didn't rely on strength. "Your species have different joint structures," she explained, adjusting her grip. "So we adapt. The principle stays the same. Control the base, compromise the structure, create the opening. The execution changes based on anatomy." One of the Quellans clicked thoughtfully. "This seems less about strength and more about geometry." "Exactly. You're not fighting the opponent's power. You're redirecting it, making them carry weight they can't balance. It's why smaller humans can compete with larger ones. We're not matching force. We're exploiting physics." The Pithel, whose name was Shen and who possessed no rigid bone structure whatsoever, asked the question Rachel had been expecting. What if someone has no joints to manipulate? Then you get creative. Your species is flexible, right? Hard to pin down? Exceptionally. Great. That means you're a nightmare to hold, but it also means you've got less structural base. Show me how you move. Shen demonstrated a flowing, almost liquid motion that would make traditional grappling nearly impossible. Rachel thought for a moment. Okay. So joint locks are out, but compression, restriction of movement, we can work with that. And honestly, your species probably has advantages we haven't even mapped yet. This isn't about making you fight like humans. It's about understanding principles you can adapt." They drilled for 90 minutes. Rachel corrected grips, adjusted positioning, emphasized the importance of breathing and staying calm when someone was actively trying to control you. Thorax proved to be a natural student, which surprised everyone, including himself. His size remained an advantage, but Rachel showed him how it became a liability when his balance broke. How his strength meant nothing if his structure collapsed. "This is what she did," he said during a water break, his voice carrying an edge of revelation. Vexra couldn't use his power because she never let him establish base. "Pretty much," Rachel agreed. He committed to a straight-line attack. Linear motion is easy to redirect if you're not there when it arrives. And you learned this in 6 years? 6 years of getting choked by people better than me. Yeah. Some people progress faster. I'm solidly average. Thorax made a sound like grinding stone, his species' laughter. "If you are average, I fear you're exceptional." After class, Rachel checked her messages. News feeds were still analyzing the original incident, now with expert commentary from xenobiologists who'd never met a human. The consensus seemed to be that humanity had somehow weaponized recreation and didn't realize it. One headline read, "Are humans too dangerous for general population centers?" Another, "The grappling ape. Why Earth's persistence hunters never stopped hunting." Rachel deleted them. She had a pressure calibration due tomorrow and an equipment manual. That wasn't going to read itself, but the requests kept coming. Security firms, diplomatic corps. Even a university on Quell asking if she'd consider a guest lecture series on human kinesthetic problem solving in hostile scenarios. She accepted the lecture offer, declined the security work, kept teaching her small class because Thorax had convinced 2 more Corinthians to join, and their payment covered her gym rent for 6 months on distant Earth. Enrollment in martial arts gyms saw a 15% increase, driven partly by humans who'd seen the footage and thought, I should learn that, and partly by the handful of curious aliens who'd made the pilgrimage to learn from source instructors. The Blue Planet Gym in Snow. Paula reported hosting its first Quellen student. The instructor described teaching someone with compound eyes and 4 arms as challenging but rad. And in the corridors of the Galactic Security Consortium, analysts continued compiling threat assessments, risk matrices, and diplomatic recommendations regarding human physical capabilities. The conclusion, buried in subsection 47 of a document titled Interspecies Interaction Protocols Revision 6.3, reads simply, recommend treating human civilians as low-level combatants for safety, planning purposes not due to hostile intent, but because their baseline physical education includes techniques designed to neutralize superior opponents. Advise against physical confrontation. Suggest verbal de-escalation and security presence. The document circulated through military channels, diplomatic offices, and security consultancies across 36 worlds. Some species found it alarming. Others found it fascinating. The Corinthians found it humbling. Vex Ra, for his part, received a copy with a personal note from his former combat instructor. Perhaps you understand now why assumptions about size are dangerous. He did understand. He'd spent 3 months reviewing the footage, frame by frame, analyzing what had gone wrong. The answer was simple and devastating. He'd assumed his physical advantages would translate to victory. He'd never considered that an opponent might have trained specifically to overcome those advantages. He'd fought with instinct. She'd fought with technique. The difference had been 8 seconds. Now, sitting in his quarters on a transport heading back to the Corinthian core worlds, he composed a message. It took him an hour to write 3 sentences. To the human Rachel Torres, I underestimated you. I underestimated your species. Thank you for the lesson. I will not forget it. He transmitted it before he could reconsider. 3 days later, a response arrived. No hard feelings. If you're ever on Threshold 9 again, first class is free. Racho Vexra stared at the message for a long time. Then he laughed, a deep rumbling sound that carried through the bulkheads. Elsewhere in the galaxy, the ripple effects continued. A Quellen security analyst named Pith published a paper titled Asymmetric Combat Methodology in Human Civilian Culture that became the most downloaded military analysis document of the decade. A Witheran philosopher wrote an essay on the psychological implications of a species that practiced violence as recreation, concluding that humans had somehow divorced lethality from malus apalis, concept most species found incomprehensible. And on Threshold 9, Rachel Torres taught her evening class, demonstrated a basic armbar on a willing Pithil student, and reminded everyone to tap before anything hurt. The goal isn't to win, she repeated for the 100th time. The goal is to understand. Violence is a language. We're learning vocabulary, not writing threats. Thorax, adjusting his stance as she'd shown him, nodded slowly. A language most species only learn in war. Yeah, Rachel said. We just decided to learn it early. Safer that way. 6 months after the incident, Threshold 9 had changed. The mining colony now hosted 3 separate martial arts gyms, one teaching jiu-jitsu, one focusing on judo, and one offering what humans called MMA, or mixed martial arts. All 3 had waiting lists. All 3 had majority non-human enrollment. the Galactic Security Consortium quietly revised its interaction protocols. The new guidelines emphasized verbal de-escalation, with human civilians, and strongly discouraged physical confrontation, except in cases of clear necessity and with appropriate backup. Some human commentators found this hilarious. Others found it vaguely insulting. Most just shrugged and went about their lives, unaware they'd become the galaxy's new boogeyman, not through conquest or aggression, but through the simple fact that they'd turned combat into a hobby. Rachel stood in her gym, watching Thorax stroll with a Quellan half his size. The Quellan, whose name was Mira, had gotten under his guard and was working toward a triangle choke with determination that would have made any human purple belt proud. Thorax tapped. Myra released immediately, and they reset. "Better," Rachel called. "Thorax, you're still dropping your elbow." That's what's giving her the angle. "Noted," Thorax rumbled. He'd been training for 6 months now and had progressed faster than Rachel had expected. Turned out Corinthians, once they got past the cultural assumption that size equaled victory, were exceptional students. Their strength became an advantage when properly directed rather than a liability. After class, Rachel locked up and walked back to her quarters through Threshold 9's main corridor. The station had grown more species, more commerce, more coexistence. Violence hadn't disappeared, but it had changed. Fewer brawls. More disputes settled through arbitration. Funny, what happened when people realized the small human walking past them might be able to put them to sleep in 8 seconds? Her come chimed. Another job offer, this one from a military academy on the Witherin homeworld. Guest instructor position. 6-month contract. Ridiculous pay. She almost declined, then paused. The message included a note from the academy's commandant. "Our officer candidates need to understand that physical superiority is not the same as tactical advantage. You've proven this better than any simulation. Please consider." Rachel thought about it. Thought about Thorax and Mira and the dozen other students she'd taught. Thought about the way they'd started viewing combat not as dominance, but as problem-solving. She accepted the contract. 3 weeks later, she stood in front of 200 Witherin officer candidates and began her first lecture with a simple demonstration. She asked for a volunteer, the largest, strongest cadet in the room. A crystalline tower of a being who stood almost 12 feet tall. "Come at me like you mean it," she said. The cadet charged. 8 seconds later, he was on the ground, tapping frantically against the mat while his classmates watched in stunned silence. Rachel released him, helped him up, and turned to the class. "Size is an advantage," she said, "but it's not destiny. Your enemy won't always be smaller than you. They won't always be weaker. What matters is whether you've prepared for the fight they're bringing, not the fight you assume they'll bring." She paused. Let that sink in. A human contractor on a mining colony just taught your military that lesson. Don't let pride make you learn it the hard way. The lecture hall remained silent. Then, slowly, one cadet began the Witherin equivalent of applause, a harmonic resonance that rippled through their crystalline bodies. Others joined until the entire hall sang with acknowledgement. Rachel smiled. This was going to be an interesting 6 months. Back on Earth, at a small gym in Colorado, a new student walked in for their first jiu-jitsu class. They'd seen the footage from Threshold 9. They'd read the articles about the human who choked out a Corinthian 3x her size. The instructor welcomed them with a handshake and a simple question. "Ready to learn?" The student nodded. "Good," the instructor said. "First rule, tap early, tap often. Your ego isn't worth a torn ligament." And somewhere in the vast expanse of space, on stations and colonies and ships threading through the dark, humans continued doing what they'd always done, turning the tools of violence into the language of sport, transforming combat into community, and somehow, without meaning to, teaching the galaxy that the most dangerous thing about humanity wasn't their capacity for violence, it was their refusal to let that capacity define them. Rachel Torres finished her contract on the withering homeworld with honors, returned to Threshold 9, and got back to work on Excavator 7. The hydraulics still needed fixing. After all, and when Vextra returned to the colony 6 months later, not as a claim jumper, but as a student, she welcomed him to her gym with the same words. She gave everyone. First rule, tap early. Tap often. He did. He learned. And the galaxy kept turning, a little wiser, a little humbler, with humans at the center of it all, not through conquest, but through the simple, stubborn insistence that violence could be practiced without hatred, that strength could coexist with restraint, and that the best way to avoid a fight was to ensure everyone knew you could finish one. Humans endure. Humans adapt. Humans rise. And sometimes, they just choke you out in 8 seconds and go back to fixing hydraulics, because that's what you do when you've turned survival into sport, violence into vocabulary, and the galaxy's assumptions into lessons learned the hard way. The end.